Good morning. I want to talk to you about faces today. Public faces, my face, your face, our faces. The philosopher Andrew Benjamin said some years ago that the face is a site of negotiation. Today I want to suggest to you that the face is not only a site of negotiation, but indeed one of contestation. We're already sharing our faces today, inadvertently as well as deliberately. 350 million pictures are uploaded on Facebook alone per day. 205 billion items of content are shared on the internet. Now, it's also important that alongside these very enjoyable activities, we share faces in other, more tragic circumstances. The UNHCR and other humanitarian agencies now use facial recognition software to protect victims of disaster and to be able to identify them. You may say, why does this matter to me? What is its significance for me? I want to ask a question, and this really is the core of my talk today. Does the mere fact of the public visibility of our faces also make them public property? Today I want to take a closer look at the provenance of the kinds of technologies that allows us to engage in this way and for these things that I've just discussed to come about. Where do they come from, and how have they become so completely ubiquitous? It will not come as a surprise to you that many of these technologies that we're engaging with today have got a military origin. A lot of technologies simply come from the military domain. But it's very, very informative for us, I think, politically to understand how the agencies that use and introduce these technologies understand their uses. How do they frame them? How do they present them to us? Frontex, and I've got a quote here on the screen for you from one of the agencies that's very concerned at the forefront of developing biometrics for border control. And they've got a very interesting way of thinking about this question of face recognition. They suggest to us that we, first of all, use a natural form of recognition. I recognize you, and I recognize your face. And this, then, they suggest, is a traditional use of biometrics. What we then do is we take this image that we stored in our brains, and we compare it manually, this image that I've got from you, and we compare it manually with an image stored in our brains. So the idea is the following. The idea is that we've got a box of memories, and when I meet somebody, when I meet you in the street or I see you in a class, I look at your face and I compare the image that I get from you to this box of memories, and then this allows me to interact with you. This makes me think very much, thinking from a sort of philosophical background, of Wittgenstein's shopkeeper, and think about the oddity of this example, who, he says, stands in a shop and somebody comes in and asks for red apples, and he opens a drawer, takes out a chart of red colors, compares them to the apples, and then hands over the red apples. I think it's interesting. But what happens in more detail in this Frontex account? It moves us, it shifts our attention from a form of recognition that we find as kind of natural between us to something, so a form of social and personal interaction, to something that's a bureaucratized institutional process of identification. It draws on these naturally seeming processes to suggest to us that the forms of recognition or the forms of technologies that we engage with are indeed simple, harmless, and a very neutral extension of something we do every day. So I want to ask you again, does the public nature of our faces, the mere fact of their visibility, justify these uses? You may say that more often than not, we consent to what we do. We, for instance, even though I might question the extent to which we, for instance, really consent when we use, when we are asked to have face recognition or biometrically readable passports, you could say, well, we've in some sense given our consent to that, so it isn't a problem. You may also say, in our contemporary world, which is riven by tragedies and problems, that actually this sort of securitization of everyday life is indeed justified. So let's leave it there and move on. What other developments are in store for us? The Science and Technology Directorate of the Department of Homeland Security has got a program, it's called a FAST program, that it uses that deploys distance biometrics. Those are biometrics that they deploy in order to engage, read people's behavior when they move at a distance, for instance, through checkpoints or airports. So this FAST program allows them to what they call read behavioral cues and psychological cues. So am I sweating? Am I looking uncomfortable? And so on, in order to detect what they call malintent, the cause, the desire, and the cause to use behavioral clues that tells them whether you intend to use harm or to cause harm. This, they very clearly suggest, will lead to a situation in which face-to-face interactions are no longer necessary. So, but the point here is that distance biometrics poses new problems, particularly with regard to questions of consent. Given that they're at a distance, they by their very nature do not require us to consent to them. Again, I hear you say, and many people say this, what does it matter? If I'm not guilty of malintent, I won't be the target of these technologies. But those who are very critical of biometrics suggests that these technologies have got a series of consequences that we need to think about very carefully. They expand the state of the gaze, the gaze of the state over us. So they enable the state to read biometrically, electronically, digitally, our bodies in ways that were previously only reserved for criminals. So there's an expansion of technologies from a domain of criminality and security to the governance of entire populations. And this is basically the idea that we live in surveillance societies. This is based on Foucault's reading of the Panopticon, where the emphasis is on the idea that the state is an ever-present authority who is observing our every action. I would suggest that this way of looking at things misses an important aspect of biometrics today. And it's precisely what it misses is this diffusion of biometrics to everyday life, the fact that we use it and that it's used by citizens in their everyday activities. And the question then, for those who think of our societies as surveillance societies, think of us as docile bodies, as bodies that are merely at the disposal of the state. But let us now look at some of these processes where these technologies are more widely deployed. They're constantly evolving, and there's a range of very interesting commercial uses that they've been deployed in. I've got here on the screen, you can see two examples. One is mobile apps like SceneTap that could capture the age range and gender of people in a bar, and it's used to basically manage populations in drinking establishments, for instance. There's also smart boards that collect demographic information about you, and that will change when you look at them. So you stand in front of a smart board, it will see that you're a young woman or an older man, and it will change whatever the information is that it gives to you. We also engage in what is these days being called life logging. So we're constantly recording our everyday activities in a plethora of ways. But I want to suggest to you that one of the most alarming and most serious areas in which these activities occurs, and something which we probably are wholly unaware of, and that's in the use of face recognition in online social networks as a tool that to simply help us facilitate, to kind of organize our digital photographs. How did this come about, and what is the story behind this? Facebook introduced face recognition technology as a tool for us simply better to enable photo management. And its function, as you know, is relatively straightforward. Once photographs are uploaded in one's profile, the software recognizes that there's human faces on it. The user is then prompted simply to put in their friends' names, identify your friend, and link it to your Facebook profile. The question is, what happens next? Once people are identified, a biometric template of their faces are created and is stored by Facebook. The next time a user uploads a photo in a profile, Facebook is able to suggest names of people that match that face, and they take it from their stored biometric set of templates. And what's very important here in terms of echoing the way in which these technologies were introduced and the process of normalization of these technologies occurred in a more military and security context, Facebook suggests that the tag suggestion tool is simply a natural step to improve our customer experience. Facebook sees itself as an innovator that facilitates the service of promoting social interactions, helping us to share photos and memories. And this is a very systematic rhetoric that is being used by Facebook that presents itself, Facebook presents itself as something more than a company. They are an organization with a critical mission to connect us and to each other in the world. So let us summarize here. We've moved from saying that these technologies emerged from a military context, and then they go into online social networks. What's important about this is that it allows for the conversions of face identification with online activities through applications that read faces and gives the user information about basic biographical data of other users. How many of us stop to think about this, about how Facebook and other social media sites are cataloging our data? There's a real question about who this data belongs to. I want to give you an example of a comment that was made by the chair of the US Senate hearing on a controversy around the use of face tagging in Facebook. This is what he has to say. He says, once someone has your face print, they can get your name, they can find your social networking account, and they can find and track you in the street, in the stores you visit, in the government buildings you enter, and the photos that you post of your friends online. Your face is a conduit of an incredible amount of information about you. And face recognition technology can allow others to access all of that information without your knowledge and in about as much time as it takes to snap a photo. So what's the diagnosis here? The state is not the only problem. There is indeed a security complex, but the most recent developments in this field have been pushed forward by Facebook, by Apple, by other social media networking sites. So then the question arises, if this is so significant, why did it not cause more controversy? And I think part of the answer lies in the fact that it is perhaps because we do now begin to think about face recognition technologies as merely one of a long-standing series of practices in which we already engage. So we've bought into that whole discourse that's produced by the security apparatuses around Facebook technologies or face recognition technologies. Why is this a problem? Privacy experts suggest that perhaps it isn't. That so long as everything is well regulated, both by governments and by trades associations, our privacy will be safeguarded. We can have privacy by design. We can design these sites so that privacy is built into them and so that we do not need to be concerned about how our data will be used. As a result of that, so at least the argument goes, users should feel safe to use face recognition in social media, and they should be reassured that it's only benign uses that this would be put to. However, I would suggest to you today that for the face recognition issue in the case of Facebook, and there's many other examples, Facebook is merely one example here, suggests something to us that there is perhaps more at stake here. Contextual integrity is not safeguarded simply by respecting the privacy requirements of one specific context. Because what we're facing here is the crossing of contexts by different technologies. And as a result of that, new social practices develop that are difficult to trace and that are very difficult to make predictions about in terms of privacy regulations. So the critical issue in the case of Facebook is not just whether there should be an opt-in, for instance, for users in terms of the use of their personal data on Facebook, and in a context that others that you may not have consented to. But central to this whole controversy is the issue of the convergence of social media, digital photography, and biometrics, and as a result of that, the creation of growing archives of data, which is apparently up for grabs by anyone. Now note that Facebook does not discuss these technology tagging suggestions. What did Facebook do when they started introducing this in their photo managing systems? It simply appeared as a suggestion that you could tag your friends. There were no special announcements, for instance, as when privacy settings are changed, then they make special announcements about the issues. They just had a blog post describing enthusiastically all the new possibilities that were opened up by this technology. The fact that we are here facing a step change of the introduction of digitized biometrics is completely covered over in the Facebook statements. That simply suggests, just as earlier, that we are simply doing something that is a natural extension of what we do, and it's perfectly in order, given that our faces are perfectly visible at any rate. So I want to think a little bit more about this question. Joseph Attic, who's an entrepreneur of modern face recognition technologies, cautions in the following way. He suggests to us that the unprecedented convergence of several technological developments may lead to a situation in which our privacy is threatened on a scale that is completely unprecedented. And what's the solution that he gives for that? He says that we need more control, better control over these applications. And these controls should be exercised in particular by the industry who creates the technologies, as well as the social media companies that deploy them. So it's basically an idea that our privacy can be protected through the cooperation of industry and the sites that use them. But I want to ask very seriously, what about our consent? Where do the users of these services fit into the picture? They don't fit into any of those discussions we've talked about before. So there are some degrees of contestation, I'm happy to say, of these sorts of technologies. In the case of Facebook, most of the contestation happened around a mix of legal action, some sort of incipient concerns that the government tried to address through their regulation, and some degree of citizen wariness. In the case of Facebook, most of the discussion simply occurred around the degree of consent that citizens had to give, and the criticism was that this was really a very, very thin conception of consent, an inadequate one that Facebook was working with. What is problematic here is precisely that the convergence of biometrics with face recognition technologies was not addressed. The disproportionality of using such a strong technology simply to identify one's friends remained completely outside of the picture. So user consent really wasn't part of the story. It didn't get a look in. And neither did any of the more recent claims and arguments, for instance, around the right to remain anonymous, enter into this whole discussion. So while it's right, I think that companies and social media sites and so on should be much more careful and transparent about how they use our personal data and about the connections that they may establish between different data sets across contexts. It's also clear to me that we need to be much more informed and very much more proactive regarding the uses of our personal data. So I want to conclude by looking at what I think is a very important shift that is occurring, that we are living through in our contemporary societies. And that is that we are moving from what is called societies of surveillance to societies of control. As I've already suggested to you, societies of surveillance creates the idea, it works on the idea that we are basically living in panoptic societies in which there's an omnipresent state that is observing every one of our actions. And the recent revelations that we've seen around the US prison program and the UK's Mastering the Internet programs seem to buy into this and confirm this judgment of our societies as indeed surveillance societies. But I think we need to think more closely and reflect more closely on what is happening here. And the example in the shift of uses of biometrics is one good site through which to do that. These tools that we are witnessing are not used by states, or not only by states, but also by individuals. They're not only used in hierarchical relations of controls, but they establish what we could call relations of traceability. What's interiorized in each of these cases is also quite different. In cases of surveillance societies, the focus is on the fact that we're being observed by some sort of a state authority. In societies of data veillance, a term that was originally coined by Richard Clarke as long ago as 1988, the focus is on the traceability of people and things. Face tagging is but one such example. And there's a commentator, Shamayu, who puts it in this way, and I almost want to conclude with this, saying, he says that we are living with automatic recording apparatuses that's integrated into every activity in which we engage, and that produces an enormous amount of automatic data flows. The question for me is, do we know and do we care? Thank you.